And that brings us to the third step in this sort of process. And this is perhaps the most sinister one. Once sex has been turned into identity, it's inevitable that sex will become highly political. Because if you think about it, at the heart of most societies' moral codes are sets of restrictions on sexual activity. You can look from society to society, they're not always the same. But every civilization has rules about what is and is not legitimate sexual behavior. Once sex becomes identity, then those rules are transformed, not simply into restrictions on behavior, but restrictions on identity. Those laws effectively define who is a legitimate person and who is not, once you take sex as being a matter of identity. So once sex becomes identity, it's inevitable that it's going to be politicized. Once, if you like, expressive individualism is the self, and once the self is sexualized, there's going to be a sexual revolution. And I should perhaps pause here and define what I mean by sexual revolution. A lot of Christians, a lot of conservative, you don't have to be a Christian, a lot of conservative people think that the sexual revolution is all about the expansion of the range of legitimate sexual behaviors. Whereas once upon a time, adultery was frowned upon. Now it isn't frowned upon so much. Whereas once upon a time, gay sex was frowned upon. Now it isn't frowned upon. It's joined the canon of things that one is allowed to do, one is allowed to get away with in society. That's to underestimate what the sexual revolution does. What the sexual revolution actually does is transform the nature and function of sex in its entirety. Under what we might call the old regime, sexual acts had an intrinsic moral quality to them. Some sexual acts were legitimate, they were moral. Some were considered intrinsically immoral. Sex with one's spouse, moral. Sex with somebody else's spouse, intrinsically immoral. Now, when you think about sexual morality, of course, we're in a very different world. Essentially, the core of sexual morality today, that which makes an act moral or immoral, is the issue of consent. Are all the people involved consenting to what is going on? If so, it's moral. If not, then it's immoral. But think about that. That's what the sexual revolution has done. It hasn't simply expanded the amount of sexual activities one can engage in legitimately. It's changed the very nature and significance of sexual activity. Think of modesty. There's another example to draw another aspect of the sexual revolution. When I first became a Christian in the 1980s, in the churches I attended, there'd be occasional debates about modesty. Sorry to the women listening, it was a sexist old world, and modesty debates tended to focus on women's clothing. How short could a skirt be? Were one-piece bathing suits legitimate? Were two-piece bathing suits legitimate? Those kind of things. What was interesting about those debates, though, was that everybody involved typically had a concept of modesty. They regarded modesty as a good thing and then debated where the limits lay. We don't debate modesty anymore because modesty itself is an inherently ridiculous concept. As soon as you start talking about modesty today, you sound oppressive. You sound pharisaical. One cannot debate modesty anymore in the public square because modesty has become inherently ridiculous, inherently repressive, precisely because of the transformation in the way we understand sexual activity to function or sexual desire to function relative to our identities.